What's up, world? My name is Zavian Dre, and this is my podcast, Dopenly Honest, breaking the chains of addiction. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Dopenly Honest. Today we have a very special guest who goes by the name of Matthew Walters. Now, when I first started visiting the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous, Matt was always one of the ones that when he shared, I listened. There was just something about his story that I could relate to. It is my hope that his shared experience and strength can help the ones that need it the most. So let's not waste no time. Let's get straight to it. All right, first thing I want to do before we start the episode, I would like to thank God for another day clean and allowing my good friend Matt to come out and share some of his experience, strength, and hope with the expectation to help the still suffering addict. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Matt. Matt, if you want to give us your sobriety date and just take us all the way back from the beginning.
My name is Matt Walters. My sobriety date is June 10th of 2005. You know, I'm going to plan on keeping that date. I really like that date, and I'm going to keep it. You know, I was 45 years old when I got into the rooms, and I'd known since I was 18, was an alky and a dope fiend. You know, I go to a couple different 12-step programs, and I qualify for all of them. To give you an idea, I grew up just up the road here. I lived here all my life. I got a twin sister, an older brother, older sister, and a younger sister. And, you know, my daddy was an alcoholic, and I saw alcoholism in the family. And he was a binge drinker. You know, he'd stay drunk for a month or two, and then he'd like to stay sober for over a year. I saw what alcoholism did. But, you know, I never had any, I loved my daddy, and I loved what he did for me. And I wasn't abused. I had everything I needed and most everything I wanted, you know. But I started drinking real early, you know, about 12 years old. Guy next door to me, he was my first drinking buddy. I got into, when I went to my first meeting, one of my first ones, he was there. He'd been sober for about 20 years. He's got over 40 years now, but he said, we've been waiting on you. But, you know, on my 14th birthday, I got an older brother. He's 8 years older than me, and he was in college. He was married and in college up at Lexington. And I was 13. The next day was my 14th birthday. And to tell you how I was thinking, I was already thinking as an alcoholic. He said, tomorrow's your birthday, what do you want to do? I said, I want to drink 14 beers. And I drank 14 beers when I was 14. And I kept that tradition up till I was 29. I drank 29 beers on my 29th birthday. And after that, I retired from that program because I couldn't hardly have 30 was too many for me. That'll give you an idea how things were. You know, I drank every chance I got. My birthday's August 1st. Right after I turned 18, we got arrested for DUI and possession of marijuana. And back then, possession of marijuana was a pretty big thing, you know.
Yeah.
And the day that my father took my twin sister to start college at Western Kentucky University, my mother took me up to Shelby County Courthouse for a first DUI trial, you know. So that should have been opened my eyes, you know. But, you know, from then on, it didn't matter what it was, I was going to do it. You know, my drug of choice was more of it. You know, it didn't matter
whatever it is.
It didn't matter what it was. You know, it didn't matter the method of delivery. You know, I'd smoke it, shoot it, poke it. It don't matter. You know, I just wanted more of it. From the time I was 18 to the time I was 45, that was the most important thing in my life, was getting the next one. And so got married, had kids. How my wife put up with me, I'll never know.
I can relate.
Yeah, I'll never know.
Because she ain't one of mine, ain't one of us.
Yeah. You know, the only thing I can think of is my wife's father was an alky, and she got to see, and this wasn't anything out of the ordinary for her. you know, we talk about what she went through and the way she does, and, and I tell her, I say, you're crazy. You're really crazy. Alcoholism is a family disease. Addiction is a
Yeah.
family disease. We affect everybody around us. And she said, well, I might be crazy, but you married me. You know what you was getting into. And I said, well.
Yeah. Now, to chime in real quick, man, I've talked to my wife, and I can relate with that because I'm not gonna put her dad's name out there or whatever, but she's told me pretty much the same thing, that she grew up and she, was around that stuff. And the only thing I can think of is maybe like, because I was thinking the same thing. Now, what would made you put up with? Now, what I came up with is maybe it comes from a place of her trying to think she can save me, or, something of that nature. Yeah, man, my wife, she's not one of us. And more often than not, because I think that she's tried to understand, and I just try to explain that it's just not something that you're going to be able to relate
Right,
to
right.
because you haven't been through it. So jumping back to what we were just talking about now, I know for me, in the beginning, for me, I realized that I had an addictive personality way before drugs and alcohol. I realized that I had those same type of behaviors with the clothes, with the shoes, and I wanted, like you said, I wanted more of it, more of it, more of whatever it was. So when I've put that first substance into my body, I had the reaction. It's I think I've been heard it explained that I have a allergy to alcohol.
Right.
Whenever I consume alcohol or drugs or anything of that nature, my brain doesn't react normally like your average person.
Exactly.
And for the longest, Matt, man, I tried to understand why. I would always argue with myself, try to understand it.
Right.
I would try to, well, maybe today, maybe I just won't do heroin. Maybe I just drink today. Maybe I just have a beer today. But no matter and it took me years to learn, at the end of the day, whatever I thought that I could mask, whatever pain it was that I'm trying to cover up, whatever I used, it led me to what I really wanted to
Exactly.
do. So I want to ask you, at first, in the beginning, did your use start out recreational at first?
Started out on the weekends, was in high school, and then got smoking pot every day. The drinking was on the weekends. The smoking pot was every day. But like I say, I would do any kind of drug you could get your hands on. And the drugs they got out now, I would do them. They've changed the names of them. MDMA, it was just MDA or Mad Dog. Meth was crank. Well, I mean, it's been so
Right.
long that they've changed the names on 'em. I never turned anything down. Nothing. Pills, it didn't matter. Quaaludes were big when I was in high school.
I've heard of those.
Yeah,
What do
man.
they do?
Man, they do it all, brother. It's a magic elixir. It's the panacea. They were great. I really loved them Quaaludes. But like I say, it just didn't matter. But now, if I had a whole bunch of stuff out on the table, cocaine was always my higher power. Now, thank God that heroin was hard to find back then. I knew one guy in Louisville that was a heroin junkie, and I tried to find it a time or two, and
Yeah,
I couldn't find it. Didn't have connections, and I'm glad I didn't, because if I did,
probably a good thing.
yeah, it's a great thing. It ruled my life. Drugs and alcohol ruled my life. I can remember times of, like I say, I've got a wife and 2 kids. I can remember times of having money in my pocket, having a lot of money in my pocket, and having to pay the dope man, needing a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread. And I say, well, I ain't got no money, because I couldn't get into that dope money, and that was, it was the most important thing. And, I write a gratitude list every day.
Yeah, I've heard you say that. I've heard you say that numerous times.
This morning, the last thing I wrote on there is, I wrote, I'm glad I get to go to church today instead of worry about where the dope man is.
Man.
That's the release and the freedom. But, going back to talking about addiction or alcoholism as a family disease, I see this. I look back on my childhood. I love my parents, love my father. I think I had a great childhood. And I've got a sister that, she's been going to therapy. all her life. She's just so messed up in the head. And her son and I are really close. And he says, "What happened? Y'all grew up in the same house, did you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "We grew up in the same house, but it's the perception, the perception of her, what she went through is a whole lot different than the perception of what I went through. We went through the same thing. It's crazy how it affects people around us. And I always like to say, the day after I said the alcoholic's prayer, God help me, I still had a house, a car, a job, a cell phone. I wasn't living in the gutter. And what I like to say is, I didn't live in the gutter. I picked it up, brought it home, and let my family waller in it with me. And they had to go through all the misery that I could lay on them, And, I hear people say, "I'm so glad I was an alcoholic," or "I'm so glad I made it to these rooms so I could get a personal relationship with God." And I think, my regret is I'm not glad I was an alkie. I'm not glad I was a dope fiend, because if I wasn't, I wouldn't have had to put my family through what I put them through, And through the steps in these programs, I've been able to try my best to make amends to them every day. I've forgiven myself, and I think that they've forgiven me. They see the growth.
Sometimes the best amends we could do are those living amends.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly. I mean, how many times have they heard us say, "I'm not going to do that again. I'm sorry." They're tired of hearing that.
Right. Now, to
Yeah.
somebody who doesn't understand it, because there are going to be some listeners that don't necessarily have addiction or alcoholism and might not know the terminology, could you explain to those what living amends are?
Well, living amends means we're going to get up today and we're not going to go out of our way to be selfish and self-centered like we used to be. The only thing we're going to worry about is getting the next one. Used to be, the only thing I worried about was getting the next one. I didn't care what I had to do and who I had to do it to get it. Now, what I'm going to try to do today is I'm going to try to get up and be nice to my wife, be nice to my family, be courteous, and not step on any toes like I used to. And, the biggest thing, Dre, I think, is when we come to realize that the way we feel is not the most important thing in the universe. We got to think of others and of how we can be of assistance and help to them. But, in the ninth step, we say, "What can I do to make this right?" Not, "I'm sorry." We don't say, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it again." We say, "What can I do to make this right?" And whatever they tell us we have to do, that's what we need to do. It's the repair of the past. And it's actually the actions that it takes for forgiveness. We attempt at doing what we need to do so we can be forgiven for our actions. We say, "What can I do?" Not, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that anymore."
Yeah, because they've heard that so many times.
That's the last
man.
thing they want to hear.
I don't know how many times that I said, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry,
Right,
I'm
right.
sorry," and really meant it. I
Sure.
really
And if
am sorry.
if you'd have been hooked up to a lie detector test at the time, you'd have passed.
We would have passed
You
with
know,
flying
"I'm
colors.
sorry, I'm not going to do that anymore." You would have passed it. And, we believed it. We believed it with all our heart. And then we're out doing the same thing 4 hours later.
4 hours
You know.
later, man.
I remember, and I looked in my pocket this morning, I had $25 cash. And when I first made a commitment to get clean, I wouldn't carry any more than, I would make sure I always had less than $20 in my pocket, because that 20 was a trigger. Could I go get me a
I go start
rock?
with a 20.
That's right. Yeah. I'm going to get a 20, and that's all I'm going to do today, And then they came out with them bank cards. That was the worst thing they ever could have done. I could go to them machines and get money,
Man, I had one of my dealers, I'm not going to say names, but he would always tell me, "Man, why you trick yourself for? Why you coming over here with $20? And then knowing you're going to be back 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times. Motherfucker, because I really don't want to spend my money with you. So I
Yeah.
tell myself, I'm going to start with 20 and really believe I'm just going to get one hit. And that's gonna be the end of it. But at the same time, I'm really knowing, man, you gonna be going back and forth all day long.
Might as well sit down over there on the corner with them.
Might as well sit down over there with them and go and make yourself a spot.
But I had that great obsession that I was going to be able to drink like a normal person.
Mhm.
I was going to be able to use dope like a normal person. Just do a little bit on Friday night.
Yeah.
That was the great obsession for me.
Yeah, because you see people around you and they can do that. And then, quite naturally, we think, well, I'm not different than him.
Right.
What makes him so special to where he can feel like he can drink one beer and or he might even be able to do cocaine,
Uh-huh.
hell, and then go to
Yeah.
work the next day.
Like you were talking about this earlier, this physical allergy. And an allergy is an adverse reaction to something. It's not a sneezing fit. We have a
Yeah,
sneezing fit because we're allergic to the pollen in the air. The meaning of allergy is an adverse reaction. And so when I put one in me, and it don't matter what it is, the adverse reaction and the allergy I have is I got to have more. And that's not normal. You know, you go out to dinner. This is the craziest thing I've ever seen. You go to dinner and you see somebody order a drink and they not finish it, or they have 2 or 3 drinks, working on that third one, they drink half of it. They say, "Oh, I gotta quit. I'm a little tipsy." And I'm
yeah.
thinking,
I'm looking at you like, what?
that's the dumbest
Yeah,
thing I've ever heard.
yeah.
You know, it's like the same way with a sack of cocaine. I'm gonna do it all till and
I'm
I
gonna
get
do
it
it
down with
all.
about 3 or 4 hits left. I'm thinking pretty good. Well, after that, I start worrying. I start
How am I
worrying.
gonna get more?
Exactly.
That's just like, for
Exactly.
example, man, my wife, she went to one of her buddies yesterday. Had a little girl outing. And, she had some wine. Now she didn't come home acting crazy. You couldn't even tell she had been drinking. She even came home with one of those little wine bottles.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it's still sitting right there on the table.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
what? I mean, if I just can't understand it because
Yeah, I can't either.
that wouldn't even have made it home. I would have
Yeah.
finished that.
You know, uh, something other than my decision separated me from using. You know, I would either pass out, run out of money, get locked up, but I never said, "Oh, I've had enough. I need to quit. I need to slow down."
Yeah.
Nothing. You know, something other than my decision would have to separate me from using. And I tell you a brilliant moment I had, and I can remember this. I was smoking crack pretty damn heavy. And I'm thinking to myself, Jesus Christ can't afford this habit. This crack will wear a man out. It's the financial woes. And I made a conscious decision to start shooting cocaine so it would be cheaper than
Man,
than smoking crack. Now that's how smart is that?
that's
And
insanity.
I could have rationalized that, thinking,
Yeah,
that's a good decision. I'm just real lucky that I'm not dead.
I am
You
too,
know,
buddy.
and that's the thing about this. I see a lot of people when they first come into the rooms, they say they're mad at God, and I'm thinking, God, and I'm looking back on my life too. I'm thinking God's got other plans for you because God abandoned me. That's the one you hear a lot. No, God didn't abandon you. God's been protecting you because there's a lot of us that never, over in the graveyard. This is a deadly disease we have,
It is. And like you said previously, earlier in the conversation, it's just the stuff that's going on today. It's a lot more powerful.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Not to say that, I mean, all drugs are bad, but the stuff they have going on today, it's quite matter of fact, life or death.
Yeah, it's a life or death matter every time you
Yes.
do it. And I can remember when this fentanyl first came out, first showed up around here, and they were calling it the pallbearer. And I was clean and sober at the time. I mean, I remember when it got here and talking to people, and they're going, pallbearer, man, I want to try some of that. You say, man, that'll kill you. Oh no, I want to try some of it, and that's what we think. That's the way we think as a dope fiend. It ain't gonna happen to me. Well, it'll happen to you.
I heard
You know.
there's an acronym, yet. You're eligible too. Because we like to think when we're out there in the madness, we like to think that we're excluded, like nothing can
Exactly.
happen to us, man. And that's just the reality of the insanity that not only that we lived in, but that we had grown accustomed to. We got used to it. So it's just a blessing now that, man, with us being on the other side, I feel it my duty to do things like this, to give back what was freely given to
Right.
me. And I know you feel the same because I hear you talking about it in the meetings all the
Right. Right.
time. And you,
I think that I've got this could be probably not good thinking, but I remember so well of the pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization that I felt. And I really never want to forget the last time I used drugs and how bad it made me feel, because if I forget that, then I'm liable to go back. But I came in and I still keep coming in because there were guys that were here when I got here. And they told me, they said, what you got to do is you got to be here for when the newcomer gets here. And I remember them guys coming in and me helping them, Friday night, I got to give a guy a 47-year token that I sponsor. And then the next day, I was doing, this guy was supposed to be doing work on the second step. He came in and he said, I'd been with him at a meeting a little bit before that. And I thought, I smell it or something, He come in and told me he'd been drinking that morning. I said, well, we need to go back to work on step one because it's obvious you haven't got that yet. And he told me about how bad he got to feeling. And I said, don't feel bad. You came in here and told the truth. That's unusual. That's progress.
Could you speak on the importance of this first step?
Oh, yeah, man. The first step is it's a twofold step. Depending on what room you're in, it's admitted we were powerless over alcohol, or admitted we were powerless over drugs, and our life had become unmanageable. And, the powerlessness is something that I fully have accepted. And it's like I couldn't have a bottle of wine in my house without me laying in bed and it talking to me, Hey, Matt, come on down. Here I am.
Yeah.
Or I never could have a sack of dope and thinking I'm going to wait till tomorrow to do it.
Hey, Matt, you got to let the people know, how does your addiction like to talk to you today?
Yeah. Well, my addiction talks to me today. It talks to me like this. It goes, hey, Matt, we haven't been together in a long time. We had some good times together. Come on by, Matt, and pick me up. You can wait till after dark. We stay together for a few hours. We'll have some good times, Matt. You remember the good times we had? That's my addiction talking to me today. But now, the way it used to talk to me when I was in active addiction, it would say, hey, you get up. I'm waiting on you to take care of me. Now, I don't care what you got to do or who you got to do it to. You got to take care of me because I'm the most important person in your damn world. And that's the way it talked to me every day.
And that is 100% accurate,
exactly.
Man.
And, I'd wake up every morning and I'd think, oh, my God, here we go again. And I was so scared. I was so afraid because I knew what I was going to have to do that day. And, you hear people talk about their sobriety date. My sobriety date is June 10th of 2005. And you're thinking, oh, man, that's when the rainbows and unicorns come out. But that day, I was so afraid. I was scared to death because I knew what I'd been doing wasn't working, and I knew I couldn't keep going like I was going. But I didn't realize what I had to do. I was scared to death because I was going to have to try something different.
That's what they say. When at the end of the roads, we found we can no longer live with or without the use of drugs. We all face the same dilemma. What is there left to do? Go on as best we can to the bitter ends, jails, institutions of death.
Oh, my.
Or find a new way to live, man.
Right.
It's obvious we have found a new way.
Correct. And, I went to these meetings. When I walked in a room, they said, we're glad to see you. Well, hadn't nobody been glad to see me for a real long time. Guys that I grew up with told me, said, don't come around here anymore. Don't come around here anymore. I can't, you're not welcome here. And these people in these rooms said, we're glad to see you. And then after the meeting, they said, keep coming back. I'm thinking, damn, ain't nobody asked me to come back in a long time. I didn't have nowhere else to go. I didn't have anywhere else to go. The big book says, of Alcoholics Anonymous says, we will tell you what we have done. And they don't say, we'll tell you what you have to do. We'll tell you what we did.
In other words, our experience.
Right, exactly.
And what has helped us.
Yeah. We'll tell you how we handled it. We're not going to tell you what you have to do. I tell you, what I really like about the NA program is they specify that alcohol is a drug. Alcohol is a drug.
It is a drug.
You're daggone right it is, And I can remember when I first came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, you say something about using drugs and they're liable to jump your ass. That's changed, And that addiction is out there waiting on me. And I wake up in the morning and I've got untreated addiction. And I got to do something to get me through that day, because left to my own devices, I'm going to get to thinking it might be all right for me to put one in me. So I have a routine every morning. You know, I say my prayers, get on my knees and say my prayers every morning. And then I read some recovery literature. I read the big book, read some more recovery literature. I reach out to some people. And, you know, it takes me about a half hour every morning.
But what I heard you were saying was a routine. For me, I've learned, you know, when I was getting high, I had a routine and I stuck to it. And you know what? That routine worked out. I was able to get the money that I needed, whatever I had to do, still do whatever to get the money to get the dope. You know, and that was a vicious cycle, a daily routine.
Exactly.
Now, you would think that once you get clean, that you would hop right into a routine and to doing, you know what I mean? What I'm trying to say, you would think you would put as much energy into your recovery right off the bat that you was doing in addiction. But I learned from me in the beginning, it wasn't that. Like I was fighting it in the beginning
Right,
when I
right.
first got clean. But now I try to put as much energy into it that I can, so I don't go back out, because I know it's just like that. But the snap of a finger, I can go back out if I don't do the things that were suggested of me in the rooms.
That routine, that's where I think importance of good sponsorship comes in. You know, I got a sponsor. I was here for about 2 weeks. I got a sponsor, and he instructed me what to do. I asked him to be my sponsor, and I went. He said, "You come down and talk to me in the morning." I went down there, and he gave me a list of things, a list of activities I had to do every day, and I started doing them from that day. And since that day, I've never missed doing them, and I'm afraid to change anything about it
It's
because
not
it's
even
worked
worth
so
the
well.
risk, is it?
No,
No.
no, it's worked so well that I'm afraid to change anything. And, you know, I go to church every Sunday. As alkies and addicts, we're given a program where they tell us, say your prayers every morning and every night. You know, read some recovery stuff. You know, and I go to church, and I go to a church, and there's some wonderful people that I guarantee are God-fearing, God-loving Christian people. And you'll hear them say, I've talked to my wife about this. They say, you know, I forget to pray. I haven't prayed. And it's like, I want to stand up and I say, what in the hell's wrong with you? But you know, I got to remember, they're not like me. They ain't a dope fiend. They don't wake up with addiction waiting to jump on you. So it's kind of funny, the perspective.
Like for me, some of the things that work for me today, and I always want to talk about this because I feel like somebody that's still out there in addiction, they need to know, and that's why they say the newcomer, the newcomer is the most important. So I feel like it's important for us now that we're in sobriety to talk about the things that work for us today. I know for me, the meetings help me in tremendous ways. I think the number one thing that has been beneficial for me in my recovery, though, other than the fact that I got my relationship back with my higher power, that's number one. Right under that, I can't even explain the relationship like with me and my sponsorship. Can you talk
Exactly.
on the importance of sponsorship to one that's just now coming into
Yeah,
recovery?
yeah. You know, first sponsor I had, he was a real prominent guy in the town here. And when I came into the first meeting there, I saw him there. It just flabbergasted me. And he was a real prominent guy. And I had known him when I was in high school because I dated his daughter. And I asked him to be my sponsor. And why that was, I'll never know. You know, I don't know why I asked him. This guy doing for me what I couldn't do for myself.
Now he's still your sponsor? Or
No, he died.
oh, I'm
He, I,
sorry to
w- I
hear it,
was, I
man.
was 9 years clean when he died. But I don't think he liked me when I first asked him, and it took him. He gave me a 1 year token and said, you know, I was high maintenance. And then two
Oh,
years,
wow.
our relationship got close. We worked the steps, called him every day, and he just instructed me on what to do, you know. And so we built a bond like it was he was just the same as my father. You know, I looked to him with that reverence and love, and knew that he was not going to steer me wrong. And he told me what he did. He told me how he did it and told me what he suggested, what I need to do. And it's just a guidepost. Sponsor somebody that will, advise you on anything. And, after a while, you quit talking about drinking or doping and you start talking about, I'm having trouble with my wife.
Right.
I'm having trouble with my daughter.
Normal life
Yeah,
problems.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. And they'll guide you through that. And they said, well, when that happened to me, and we think we're unique, but we're not unique. We go through the same thing everybody goes through. But for me, a sponsor was just a bedrock. And it's something that I had in a long, my dad died a long time
Yeah.
before I got clean. It was just a wonderful, wonderful
Yeah.
relationship,
I almost feel like, man, to be honest with you, I feel like my sponsor is somewhat. Now, they say the only job for a sponsor is to take you through the steps. I completely agree with that. However, you come across some and it's just deeper than that, because they tell us, the number one thing that we're trying to do in recovery is to stop getting high. But once we stop getting high, we got to learn how to live. So my
right,
thing is with my sponsor, or I'm sure it's for anyone's sponsor. Hey, how did you get through this certain situation in life?
exactly.
How did you handle it without getting high?
Yeah, yeah. And I can remember telling him stuff like right when I was a new father and telling him stuff. And just for instance, one of my children had colic. And I told him, I said, I can see why people throw their babies out the window. I said,
Oh
I
yeah.
hate that, I hate
Yeah.
this. And he said, well, don't worry about it too much. Everybody feels like that. And I thought I was the only one that ever felt like that, and he
Yeah.
assured me, you know, say, no, that's normal,
Yeah.
So like you say, once we got, after a couple of years, we didn't talk about drinking anymore. We talk about living, being a better husband, father,
Mm-hmm.
son, that kind of thing.
Cause you know what, Matt? Like, cause for so long we lived life one way. When we were happy, we got high or drunk. When we were sad, we got high or drunk. When we went to the Christmas party, we got high or drunk. When we went to any type of social event, we was high or drunk. So
Exactly.
guess what? Now we're not using. So how we go about life without,
And the thing that we have to learn, and we learn it through the steps, is when we put the drink and the dope down, we still got to deal with us. And we're still I know people that just stop drinking or stop using without any kind of program. And they're just in such a bad mood all the
it's
time.
miserable.
They're miserable, And I can't remember who I was talking to my wife about, and I told him, I said, they need to take a drink. I wish they'd take a drink because they're miserable.
So then, yeah, that's so interesting that you say that, because it's like, are you any better? Just because you're not drinking. Matter of fact, you might be more miserable now than when you was drinking.
Exactly. We got a sense of ease and comfort when we took a few drinks or took a few hits of dope.
Yeah.
That's what we were seeking. We were seeking relief. My problem was when I started drinking as a child and then started using every kind of dope I can, I wasn't comfortable with myself. There was something in me, and they say it's a God-sized hole in each one of us, and I've tried to fill it up with booze and dope. Well, that worked for a while, but then it got just too miserable. So the result of me working the steps is, and you said this earlier, the most important relationship in my life today is my relationship with my higher power.
Yeah.
That's the most important relationship. But before I had that relationship, if you take away the dope and the booze, I'm going to be miserable because I don't have anything to make me feel like I want to feel. Well, now God makes me feel, I have that warm, fuzzy feeling I used to get when I took a shot. And I know he's with me all the time. He don't cost me no money. Don't cost me no money to be close to God. It cost me a lot of money to be feeling like I was wanting to feel, before I got that.
It was a high cost of low living.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, yeah. But it's funny, what's important to me now today, the prestige and the highfalutin job and the nice car and all that stuff, that's not important to me today. What's important for me today is my relationship with God, my relationship with my wife, my children, my family. my relationship with the people around me. One of the great spiritual gifts is just to be courteous, be nice to people. You know, I had a sponsor, my second sponsor. He said, it's hard to be spiritual when you're driving down Washington Expressway giving people a finger because they cut you
Road
off.
rage.
Yeah, you know, you can't be spiritual and be hating on people and cussing them out and all that kind of stuff at the same time.
Once we're in it, we got to be all the way in it. For me, I struggled in the beginning with, not wanting to fully surrender. And it's just like here recently, I've put down, like you just said, I've put down the drugs, the alcohol, but along the way, I picked up more vices. If I'm being completely honest, that's the name of the podcast, Dopenly Honest. You know, I had a bad habit with sports gambling. I just recently put it down. Just recently, within the past couple weeks.
Yeah. That's a tough time to do it with the tournament coming on.
Right. So now it's like watching sports, it's like I can actually enjoy the game now. I'm not sitting here worrying about who's going to score this many points. And what I have found is it wasn't really affecting me financially. I wasn't losing that much money like that. Now, I wasn't ahead either. Was the fact of it was just consuming too much energy. And I found myself on my phone all the time, tuning people out, and it was just causing too much problems, man. So I had in it, more importantly, it made me feel like that I was using again. It was in my mind, like when I would wake up, who's playing today?
Right.
How much money am I going to put on this game, that game? Throughout the whole day, it's all I'm thinking about. And I was becoming miserable, man. And I would give myself the excuse I would make was, well, you ain't where you want to be financially, so maybe you might hit.
Exactly.
And maybe you might get this big old lick, and and that's going to set you up. You're going to be good. Knowing good and well, you can't never beat the house.
Right.
The
houses don't ever close. I tell you, I could go that way real fast. I like gambling, and I can see. I've got on my phone, I've got a app where I can see the point spreads and the lines, but I don't bet with them.
Mm-hmm.
I got a bookie, and I call in one bet a week because I know I got an addictive personality. I quit taking dope, and I started buying cowboy boots.
Yeah.
I got like 50 pairs of cowboy boots.
Yeah.
And I just got that addictive personality. And I can remember I was working for a construction company, and this restaurant caught on fire. And we had to go rebuild this restaurant. Time was of the essence. So we were working on Sunday. I went to the restaurant to work early one Sunday morning, and nobody was there. There was a Dairy Queen across the street. And I said, I'm going to have me a Blizzard for breakfast.
Blizzard for breakfast.
And they said, I forget how much they said it was. And I told them in that window, I said, man, that's higher than dope is. And he said, yeah, but it ain't as much fun. Well, I get around to the window, and I said, I've never been arrested for eating a Blizzard. I've been arrested for taking that dope and having that dope on me, but I ain't never done it.
Absolutely.
For having a Blizzard, But I never want to forget. I think that if I forget how bad I felt, because I had become everything I never wanted to be. That's what I became, And I've been around for a little while, and I see somebody, you see somebody, they be doing good, and then you ain't seen them for a while. And then they come back, and you say, where you been? And they say, oh, you know where I've been. I say, you been back out there in that madness? And they say, yeah. And I say, well, how was it? Because I've been thinking about going out myself. I've been thinking about it. And they go, oh, man, it is miserable. It is miserable. Worse than it's ever been. And I say, well, you know what? I'm glad you went because I was thinking about going, but I'm just going to stay where I'm at.
I'm just going to stay right here.
Yeah, I'm going to stay right here. But, here's the thing about it. And I give that guy a 47-year token. I was over that meeting 20 years ago, and I saw a guy get up and get a 20-year token. I thought, that's the linest SOB there ever was. Can't nobody go 20 years
without doing nothing.
Without doing something. At least they go on vacation or Christmas or something. I said, I can't believe that. But I saw a guy get up and get a 30-day token. And I said to myself, I might be able to do that. If you got 3 days, you can help that man that first come in, because I guarantee you, that new man coming in, he don't know how to do it for 3 days. If you're an addict like me, and every day is a gift. I tell people, I might take a drink tomorrow, but I'm not going to drink today. We'll be at a restaurant, and they'll go, can we bring you something from the bar? I say, no, don't want anything. And then every now and then they'll ask you again, can we bring you something from the bar? And I'll tell them, I say, you go right ahead. Bring me something. Make it a big tall glass of something 100 proof. Because I'm an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. And I said, before you could bring it, you go ahead and call the police. Because by the time I get done with that, you're going to need it. Because I'm going to go off the rails. And they'll look at my wife and she'll shake her head. Yes, And that's the same way with anything I've ever done. It don't matter. I want more of it. Too much is never enough. That was my motto.
So what happens is, man, because I can relate, and what happens after living so many years like that and continuing to visit different jails and institutions, man, we finally get sick and tired of being sick and tired. So once you came to that point, and once you crossed over into this new life and leading up to where you are now, how is your life different today?
Just to give you an idea, that good friend of mine I grew up with that told me, don't be coming around here anymore. I got clean. I got to be a pallbearer at his daddy's funeral. And one good thing about it, Dre, we live in a small town. Everybody knows when you're out there in the madness, and everybody knows when you're clean. And so they started asking you, can you come talk to this guy? I got to do the eulogy at the funeral of one of my nephews. I'm on a leadership committee at church. Just crazy things
Yeah.
that you would have thought. I was crackhead on people's phones, That was what they called me. I got a wife that loves me, children that love me. They invite me to come to parties now, invite me to go on vacation with them. They didn't used to do that. I didn't used to go to the grocery store or Walmart unless it was real, real late, because I didn't want to have to see somebody I
Right.
might owe money to, or
Right.
I might have got overrun. So I can go anywhere I want now, look anybody in the eye. And the best thing, and when I say my prayers, I thank God, I thank God for a lot of things, but I say thank you most for the peace, faith, and serenity, because that's what I got, I can lay my head down at night and know I didn't steal nothing, know I didn't mess over anybody, and
Yeah.
that's the thing. I can live with myself. I can be alone with myself. That used to be torture.
Yeah, I used to couldn't look myself in the eye, man.
Exactly. I hated shaving because I'd have to look myself in the mirror. Like say I had become everything. You know what's right and wrong when you're
Mm-hmm.
4, 5, 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I had become everything I never wanted to be. Thanks to the addiction that I brought on myself. I don't have to live like that anymore. And people say, how's that 12-step stuff work? And I say, I don't know how it works, but it works real good. But Dre, the funny thing about it is I heard this said at a meeting. The only thing that we have to gauge about how well AA or NA works, are you doing better today than you were the first day you got here? And hands down, I'm doing better.
Yeah, and then they say progress and not perfection.
Correct. Progress, not perfection. I still got a lot of character defects. But when I quit taking dope and drinking, when God took that obsession away from me, that took care of a lot of my character defects.
Yeah, because then you could work on the rest.
Sure.
As long as we're putting a substance in us, everything goes out the window, man, and I'm sure you can relate. So Matt, man, I wanna go here and to the still suffering addict. This is how I usually close out my episodes. To the still suffering addict that cannot seem to stop, and we know we can relate. What's one thing that you would tell them, one piece of advice that you would give them?
For the still suffering addict, I would say, come on in and try what we got. Come on in. If you don't like it, you can leave, but come on in and give us a shot. We want to help you because when we help you, it helps us. It helps us probably more than it helps you. And I love going to meetings where there's newcomers and they get to talking and I remember exactly what I felt like, but I say, don't give up hope. Come on in and we want to help you. And we'll teach you as far as getting clean. I got clean every morning. I got clean every day. I couldn't stay that way. We'll give you the tools that we use to stay clean and sober. And it's a much better way.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
I'd have to double down with you, man. I'd have to tell that individual to give yourself a chance because more often than not, when we're out there, when we're using, it's not that we don't want to stop. It's that we literally cannot stop if we don't become open-minded and willing to do something different. In the rooms that I go to, it says the only requirement is a desire to stop. So I'd have to tell that person, become open-minded, man, become willing, and just know that there's a better way of life, and it's just that simple, man.
Exactly.
And we like to make simple things more difficult than what they are. It's just that simple. You don't have to keep using. There's forms of help. It's as simple as reaching out, man. So Matt, man, like I said, from the bottom of my heart, I really genuinely appreciate your time today, man. And I could always relate to what you say in the meetings. And since my earlier times, some of my first times coming in the rooms, you always gave me inspiration to want to do something better. I always thought you was a funny guy too, man. So I appreciate you coming out. Like I always say, there is a better way. Continue to like, share, and subscribe, and keep tuning in for more recovery-related content. Peace, and we love y'all. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dopenly Honest. I know all too well that recovery is an uphill battle, but there is hope. For resources, find your local NA, AA, or CR meeting. I can't stress enough how crucial meetings are to my personal recovery. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and meet us back right here for more episodes of Dopenly Honest. And remember, you are not alone. One day at a time, we do recover.